All right. Good afternoon and welcome to Clayton County Library System Virtual Graphic Novel Club. I get mixed that up every time, but I'm Erica Ware.
Roland Wellmaker.
And we have a special guest today that will be joining us from the Forest Park branch also.
Adrian.
So yeah, she's the one on camera. The rest of us have our cameras off today because we're all in the same room for once since COVID. So today we will be talking about the LGBTQIA characters of DC and Marvel. And it's currently, we're in the middle of June. Today's June 15th, exactly the middle of June. And it's also Pride Month. And so around the world, people are celebrating Pride. And I'm going to start us off today by talking about sort of the history of representation in comics and also just some of the history of the LGBTQIA movement. And I'm just going to jump right in. We want to, as a nation, a community, celebrate all walks of life and all people, including how they identify. And so in comics and graphic novels, there's been a movement in the last 20 years to accurately represent people of different genders and sexuality. But the history of comic books has sort of, I guess, minimized that. In the 1950s, a book was written by Dr. Frederick Wertham, and it was called The Seduction of Innocence. He wrote this book and he was complaining about how sexuality and violence within comic books was infiltrating America's youth at the time. And his biggest claim was that there was a hidden gay agenda in comic books, Batman and Robin living together, Batman being a bachelor man who adopts a young ward. And direct quote from his book was a wish dream of two homosexuals living together. He said about Wonder Woman living on an island with nothing but women labeled her as a lesbian. In response to this, because when parents of America got involved and read The Seduction of Innocence, educators read it. So what they started doing was basically they stopped their children from reading comic books, from buying comic books. I mean, because the comic industry was huge at this time. And the publishers of comics decided to create a comic code. The Comics Code was created in 1954, and in Section C of the Comics Code is a section called Marriage and Sex. And Part 4 of that section states directly that the treatment of love romance stories shall emphasize the value of the home and the sanctity of marriage. In 1950, gay marriage was prohibited in the United States. It was also considered deviant behavior. And in some areas of the United States, it was also a criminal act. You could go to jail being gay, lesbian, or even transgender in the United States. The comic book industry, this wasn't the only thing about it, but this particular code is what stopped them from representing all people in all walks of life. So it stayed in the industry, it was adopted, and it adhered to this code for about 20 years. So from 1954 until almost 1971. In the 1960s, you had the civil rights movement in the United States happening, and this was brought to the world stage by figures like Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and it was acknowledging the stance on injustice against Black Americans in America. But also in the 1960s, this ushered future movements from the civil rights, those civil rights acts that were happening. It ushered in things like women's rights, and the sexual revolution happened during the 60s that moved into the 70s. And one particular incident that happened in New York City in June 1969 was Stonewall. Stonewall Inn was a gay club that was home to gays, lesbians, and transgenders in New York City. It was a safe place for them to go. It wasn't the best place, but it was a safe place. Most of these clubs around New York City at the time were ran by the mob. So the mob paid off the police, and and with the mob came a lot of money, but the mob controlled these clubs also. And so with that, you had Stonewall Inn was located in Greenwich Village in New York City. The raid was, first of all, not, they were not notified ahead of time. Usually when they had a raid, someone would notify the club ahead of time because the mob was playing the police off. Well, this particular raid on this particular night, they were not notified. And at that particular time, it was kind of a catalyst. Violent protest erupted between police and the gay, lesbian, transgenders that were there that night. And basically they were trying to round them all up, find them, or lock them up. But this particular night, they just weren't having it anymore because this was a constant threat for them. Their clubs would be raided, they would be paraded out in front of everyone so that and their pictures taken, posted in the newspaper. So many of these people were outed because of this. And this could create job loss, your family could find out, it was just a lot. And so this particular night, they actually fought back. It was the catalyst, it was 6 days of violent unrest. And it was the catalyst for what was to come. It wasn't necessarily that particular protest, but that was the protest, that was the catalyst. Within the next year, 1 year later, the first Pride March took place in Manhattan. It was the Christopher Street Liberation Day Parade. They chanted in the streets, "Say it loud, gay is proud," and Stonewall was the motivating force that led to the creation of LGBT political activism, and it led to numerous gay rights organizations, including Gay Liberation Front, the Human Rights Campaign, GLAAD, and PFLAG, which is Parents, Families, and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. And so that was 1970 when that first Pride Parade took place in New York City, and they marched from Stonewall Inn into to Central Park and in the streets. So also around this time, the 1970s is coming into play, and in the comics industry, that comics code is getting to be a little bit stifling. Nobody wants to read boring comics. So if you had this, it's a long, I definitely, when you get to our works cited, when we do that, there's some works that we looked into that you can copy and paste and just check out, because the comics code was it made comics kind of boring. The first to challenge comics code was Stan Lee, of course, of Marvel. In 1971, he wrote an issue of Spider-Man that involved drug use of one of the characters. It wasn't Spider-Man himself, but it was a friend of Spider-Man's. And Marvel published this issue in 1971 without the comic code's seal of approval. It never did it again, but it was a turning point for comics. Similarly, around the same time, DC publishes a storyline using Green Arrow. Green Arrow's assistant is Speedy. Speedy is on heroin. And so Green Arrow, Green Lantern find out that they're fighting drug dealers, and Green Arrow's ward, Roy Speedy Harper, is found to be a drug addict dealing with, they found out in the midst of this. And so the issues were important for the times, and because of that, both DC and Marvel felt that these things, drug use needed to be included in the comic book industry, because kids needed to be warned that one overdose from heroin can happen. You could end up in the hospital, you could die, things like that. And especially Stan Lee, he was like, we need to be warning kids about this, not hiding it from kids, so that we can keep them safe, because obviously kids were getting into drugs in the 70s. And because of that time and that period, also the same thing that wasn't being displayed on pages was sexuality. And so a lot of underground comics started popping up around the 70s that were dealing with sexuality and that awakening from the sexual revolution. And so some of the LBGT communities start printing their own comics. And you had women's comics, but it's spelled WIMMEN. And you had Ain't Me Babe, It Ain't Me Babe comics come out in 1970s. The sexual revolution and the women's revolution fueled these underground comics, and publishers started popping up across the United States in places like New York City and San Francisco. Mainstream comics did not really begin to depict LBGT characters until the 1980s. And when I say depict, I don't mean depict in a positive or non-stereotypical light. These comics were very stereotypical. You had one of the first characters was Extrano. I'm sorry. Yeah, Extrano. He was, we're going to talk about him a little bit later. Roland, I think Roland's going to cover him. But he was full of stereotypes. He was a gay man. His origin story that led him to be the character he was HIV positive. Other characters that were never fully developed or used sexuality to trick someone or capture someone. So they were just not the most positive. But the 1990s ushered in openly gay and lesbian characters such as Marvel's North Star and X-Men's Mystique. DC also introduced characters such as Renee Montoya from Batman, Midnighter, and Apollo. So you saw a few characters that were actually openly gay or lesbian. And then the 2000s saw a lot of reintroducing of characters that already existed in the mainstream comics that came out of the closet during this time. And what we're about to do is dive into some of those characters. So that's just a little bit of the history, and now you guys get to see some of the actual characters that we're going to talk about. So for DC, we have first character on our list is Maggie Sawyer, who is out of Metropolis. She is in the Superman comics. She appeared in 1987, Superman Volume 2. She's a police officer that has worked in both Gotham City and Metropolis. She was after Commissioner Gordon, he didn't retire, but he went to do something else. I think he had gotten hurt. Maggie ended up becoming commissioner in Gotham City for a little while. And she was respected by her peers. She was not always out of the closet. She was actually married to a man, had a family. She divorced her husband when she realized that, you know, she had been living a lie and that she was actually a lesbian. And so when she did that, she sort of, this was around the 2000s when they kind of rewrote her character. She moved to Gotham City around that time. And she was married to James Buchanan Sawyer. They had a daughter. When she came to terms with her sexuality and came out as a lesbian, she divorced her husband. She began a long-term relationship with Batwoman, who is Kate Kane. They were actually engaged for a little while, but Kate broke off their engagement. And she's currently in the Rebirth universe. She's back in Metropolis, and she's back working with Superman. So again, she was not an openly gay character in the beginning, but then she became one later on when they sort of rewrote her character in the 2000s. She came out of the closet, basically.
All right, so our next character we have up is Iceman, aka Sigrid Nansen, a member of the Justice League of America. Her first appearance was in Infinity Inc. number 32 back in November of '86. Now, this is a character that can be confused with another character that is just called Ice. And we will see where that confusion comes in a second. Sigrid Nansen received her powers as the result of an experiment funded by the Norwegian government in an attempt to please both her overbearing scientist mother and the Norwegian government. She reluctantly agreed to the experiments. The goal of these experiments was to duplicate the abilities of what at the time were a legendary tribe of ice people. With the experiment being a success, though, one of the big side effects was that her skin was permanently turned blue. She took the name Ice Maiden and joined the Global Guardians as her country's representative to that international super team. Now, this is where the character Ice comes in. Upon the discovery of a real tribe of ice people, the princess of that tribe, of Tora Olaf's daughter, joined the Global Guardians. And this led the original Ice Maiden to quit. Years later, after Ice left the Global Guardians and joined Justice League International, she was killed by the Overmaster. At this point in time, Sigrid basically came out of hiding and reemerged and basically rejoined Justice League. And she chose to honor the fallen heroine by serving as her replacement. There were hints of a romantic relationship with her teammate Fire, but this was all part of a plan hatched by Sigrid. She realized that Fire was not coping with Ice's death. Fire and Ice were basically best friends, and Ice at the time had been dating Guy Gardner. So basically, when what Ice Maiden did was she realized that Fire was attempting to control her, and in order to break the cycle, she physically remade herself to resemble Ice and showed romantic feelings towards Fire. The shock of this made Fire realize that Ice was gone and she could not recreate the past. During her time in JLA, she was disliked and criticized by Guy Gardner because of this, because he had not come to terms with Ice's death.
And see, this is that, yeah, go ahead.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, what was the difference between the Global Guardians and the International Justice League? It just seems like the same group. Why?
No.
Well, International Justice League, it kind of was like the UN. Like you had the UN of the Justice League, because you still had Justice League that was based in like Superman, Batman, all of them, but they were based on, you know, the moon at this time, because this was pre-crisis. Yeah, it's the main character. So you do international, and then you're including Canada,
right,
the UK, India, Japan. You're including the world, so they could pull anybody.
So it's like the FBI, and then they went global to like NATO. Is that
no, what it is in the comic books. In the comic books, you had the Justice League. That's one group of characters. They were based out of the United States for the most part. Well, other countries had superheroes too, and that's where the Global Guardians comes in. They were more of a European Justice League before Justice League basically went international.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was just two separate groups. That's all it was. There's nothing to get confused over.
And what you'll find a lot of times in comics, they will do stuff like that because everybody has a group. Some of the characters we're going to talk about are in groups that no longer exist anymore, but their characters are still in the DC or the Marvel universe because they just get sucked into another group. They may go to the Avengers, or they may go to the Justice League, or they just get sucked into another group. Their stuff may be canceled, like their publication. Well, more of what it's like is Marvel or DC will look at the sales of that particular, run, and they'll be like, ooh, it's not doing too well. But the character may still be popular. Static was one of those characters where he was popular when he first came out, but then it kind of waned. But then they got rid of his publication, but they just incorporated him into Young Justice. It's just what they do, because I don't want to get rid of the character altogether, but I also don't want to publish. I don't want to spend money to publish this particular run anymore. Ice Maiden is also one of those characters that it just was more like she used trickery to sexuality to trick. It was kind of a bait and switch for DC. They weren't really being they weren't being progressive at the time. This was the 80s into the 90s, and they were kind of just, oh, let's make her seem like she's in love. And so, but this is one of those characters where I say it's sort of a bait and switch with them.
So she was like one of those that you were talking about earlier, that like used it as a hustle, but it wasn't really great.
Yes, basically. All right, so we got one of my favorite characters, Detective Renee Montoya, aka also The Question. And actually, the question is the original question is back in publication now with the future state, but she was questioned for a little while. Renee was introduced into the world of Batman animated series as a morally strong and virtuous, open-minded cop. She was partnered with Harvey Bullock, and we all know Harvey is oafish and bullheaded. Bullock, yeah, so they were partnered. She was kind of the young detective coming on, and he was the old, stuck in his ways. And she had more faith in Batman than he did, so they kind of they were yin and yang to each other, but they worked well together. And Commissioner Gordon kept them as a partner. She was on a GCPD officer before she became a detective. She had she was one of the few cops that Batman could actually trust too. She kept the peace during the events of No Man's Land and earned her a spot on the illustrious Major Crimes Unit. Her new detective partner was Crispus Allen, and she was under the lead of unit leader Maggie Sawyer. So this is the time Maggie Sawyer has moved into Gotham. Jealous of Montoya's newfound success and racked with fear that she had forgotten about him, Two-Face emerged once more into Montoya's life to frame her for murder and reveal her most closely guarded secret. So Two-Face outs Renee as a closeted lesbian during this time, and she kept her romantic life secret, including her sexual identity from friends and family. And though she was cleared of all charges of murder, even though he framed her for murder, she was cleared of those charges. The damage done to being outed that way, her family basically stopped talking to her because they did not believe in being gay or homosexual. She was no longer welcomed in her family home. Maggie offered a place for her to, like a shoulder to basically cry on, that because she had just came out herself. And so it was a gut-wrenching, soul-wrenching time for Renee. This is around the time she also began to drink heavily. So her years after this, she basically goes on bender after bender. But she also starts living her life as an openly gay woman. And she is the first lesbian superhero no, not the first lesbian superhero, one of the first of DC Comics. And the series she was outed in, if you want to read it, it's called Half-Life. I think it's available on DC Infinite Universe if you have that. But yeah, she has a great backstory. And she has a connection to our Batwoman that we'll talk about next. Okay. And I'll just go ahead and speak about Batwoman because she is she wasn't one of the first. Kate Kane's history in DC was basically, Adrian and I were talking about this earlier. Her history is she was created, well, remember earlier I was talking about that gay panic that came from the seduction of innocence. Kate Kane was introduced into the Batman comics in 1956 as a love interest for Bruce Wayne. So her character was created for that in 56. She was this rich, so Socialite, yeah. She was rich. She was always at parties. She would run into Bruce a lot. But she sidelined as a vigilante as Batwoman. And at that time, it was a separate word, bat and then woman. She had Batgirl as her sidekick, who was a love interest for Robin. So that there was no more questions about were Batman and Robin gay. But she was killed in 1970. I believe she was killed off in 1976. She pops back up in 2006 in 52. That was a run that DC did. She pops up in 52. This time she's still that socialite that, but now she's, instead of Bruce's love interest, she's Bruce's cousin. And it's 2006. Her connection to Renee is that they used to date. And because Renee was in the closet, Kate was in the closet also. And they were dating secretly. When 52 happens and all the superheroes disappear, Kate Kane is left as Batwoman for the city of Gotham, but she's not affiliated with Batman because he's disappeared and nobody knows where he's at. Her first introduction to Batman is actually Dick, who took over Batman for, nobody in the city wanted anybody to realize that Batman had disappeared. So Dick started dressing up as Batman. And he came from Bellhaven and came back to Gotham and started dressing up as Batman. He basically gives her all the weapons and all the stuff that she needs to be Batwoman from the Bat family. When Bruce comes back, he is not impressed by the fact that Batwoman exists in his city, nor does he embrace her. She is military. Yeah,
rude.
He is very rude about it. He is, and the fact that they're cousins, and he knows that that's his cousin because he knows her secret identity. But she was trained by her father, who was military. She also went to West Point, was kicked out during the Don't Ask, Don't Tell time of West Point. And she wanted to fight crime after Batman saved her one night after she was rescued from muggers after being out partying and drunk in the city. And so, yeah, but.
That is,
yeah.
That is the one point that they carried across greatly in this TV series. So
yes, they did.
That portion of her story.
Yeah. But she was inspired by Bruce?
No, she was at West Point.
Yeah, she went to.
It was either come clean and they both get expelled, or one of them come clean and the other one escaped. So Kate Kane basically told on herself so that her girlfriend could stay at West Point, and her girlfriend ended up becoming a military engineer as well. Yeah.
So Kate was openly out in comics, and so her character from 2006 on was written as being an openly gay, lesbian character. She has been linked to, of course, Maggie Sawyer. Like I said earlier, she was, they were engaged for a little while. Renee, she and Renee are on and off due to their superhero, because Renee's the Question, she's Batwoman. Renee sometimes leaves for long periods of time, and Batwoman disappears for long periods of time. So as far as having a relationship, it's kind of tough, but I think currently right now she and Renee are together. Don't ask me about future state Batwoman because I don't know. I have not seen anything about her, but yeah. Last time in Flashpoint after and Rebirth, they were back together. So yeah. Did you had a comment?
If you were like an OG comic reader, like I collect these from when I was a kid, 19, like a book, and you read this, and you find out the new one, you like that doesn't make sense. So like if you were trying to follow the time, you'd be like.
I think it's more an understanding the fact that they read comics all the time. So if you like me, I'm not a boomer, but
you're an OG comic.
I'm an OG comic book reader, and what I found out is that when I see the titles change, like X-Men is going through like 6 or 7 different iterations. But when I see that new one, instead of picking up that new one, I'll just wait and go back and find out when that series started, because evidently there's going to be some story changes. You can't just go from like what you were reading in late 1980 and then turn around in 2015 and pick up a book and just think that a little bit of time has passed in between that story. They've changed so much.
Exactly.
You know, especially with the comics having to
the rebrand.
well, not just rebrand, but they are basically I want to say like they're a type of newspaper because they do deal with our current issues.
Yes.
So, well, think about it. The comics of the 70s don't deal with the same issues that the comics of the 2000s deal with.
Yeah.
And so that's a big thing too.
Yeah.
Our next superhero will be Grace Choi of The Outsiders. First appearance,
did we cover her
Outsiders
recently?
#1, August 2003.
Didn't we cover her recently?
Well, we covered her as
Asian.
as part of the Asian
She is.
and Pacific Islander comic heroes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, she is the daughter of an Amazon, not the Amazons that you would think of when you think of Wonder Woman, but the Amazon of Banner Migdal. And she grew up in different foster homes, but never really had a home. The only foster parents she had fond memories of were the Nansen's of Cleveland Heights, Ohio. Now, she has had a very troubled childhood. When she was 9, she ran away from her foster home at the time because she was fleeing an abusive environment. But what she ended up doing, she survived for 2 months on the streets. But then she was kidnapped by a child prostitution ring that was led by a man named Tanner. This is where she gets the triple downward triangle that you see tattooed on her lower back. With that tattoo, basically was held by dozens of other children that were kept in the chattel and moved around the state for being abused. She endured this for 3 years, and then when she was 12, her powers kicked in and she was able to escape. Once she escaped, she did go back and free the other kids.
She did.
And basically put a hurting on town.
Yes, she did.
Now, the Amazons of Banner Migdal, they seem to be like Brazilian instead of Greek.
They are not Greek. Actually, I feel like, because I covered them a little bit later with another character,
Right.
Egyptian.
Okay.
Yes, they're out of.
Yeah, that's right.
They're
Egyptian.
out of that. Yeah, there's another Ben Magalda.
It's Banner
McDowell.
Migdal.
There's another Amazonian who is older, that's out of that same tribe. Yeah, but we'll cover her later.
Okay.
And then you can go ahead and cover that one too.
Now, this next character, is actually Grace Choi's wife. Thunder being.
Now.
Hold on. Thunder being the daughter of Black Lightning. Okay, with the new CW TV show, they had they had Thunder and Grace Choi's relationship basically front and center in that, because Thunder basically came out to her parents for the first time in the Black Lightning series.
Yes.
In the comics, they are still together, but there's a difference in backstory. Thunder is still the eldest daughter of Black Lightning, and the way that she comes into contact with Grace Choi is that in the beginning, Grace Choi, she didn't like Superman. She had a problem with him. She thought he was a Boy Scout, but she loved the way that Black Lightning got his hands dirty, like he was streets.
He was out here cracking heads.
That's how she ended up being a member of the Outsiders and meeting Thunder there. Thunder was born with the metagene, and at a certain age, she was discovered that she was capable of increasing her physical density, allowing her to become nearly invulnerable, along with the ability to create huge shock waves when she stomped on the ground beneath her. She was not encouraged by her father, Black Lightning, to become a vigilante. He asked her to hold off on her superhero antics until she graduated college. Thunder kept this promise. But on the day that she graduated, she began her career as Thunder, and was recruited by Arsenal to join the newly reformed Outsiders, a team that her father had been a founding member of under the leadership of Batman. Although she got along with most of her teammates, she instantly butted heads with the metahuman powerhouse known as Grace Troy. Eventually, the squabbling pair developed a mutual attraction to one another and began dating. This is during one mission, Thunder is critically injured and leaves the team for some time. And it was later that she basically rejoined the team after she got better. And this is actually after Batman took over the team again as leader.
Yeah.
And she was an openly gay character in the Outside.
Yeah. Yeah, that, and those two together, when you talk about Grace, you're probably going to talk about Thunder. And Grace is actually bisexual. She identifies as bisexual. Right. Thunder identifies as she's lesbian.
Now, in the they kind of showed that with Grace
in the TV
show, yeah. Because what you see is when you first meet Grace, you don't meet her as a human.
Oh, yeah.
She's running around she's a shapeshifter.
Yeah.
So she's running around as a cheetah or a leopard or something. And when they first find her, what they do, they come into an apartment and they find a horse that has been dragged into the apartment and mutilated. But it looks like something's eating it. Not, nothing weird, just something's eating. And her first transformation that we see is as her turning into a human. She turns into a whole Chinese man. Mm-hmm. So that's what in the TV show Thunder has to go between the old Chinese man, the leopard, and the young Chinese lady that she met at the bar. The reason for the transformation into the Chinese man is because in the beginning, Grace Troy does not have her memories. She cannot remember whether she's male or female. So she has been leading this life where, guess what? She changes into whatever it is that suits the purpose.
Yeah. Because they kept her backstory of she was abused as a child and a part of that reign. So that all comes out over the course of the 5 seasons of the TV show. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so it's really good. Grace and Thunder, they're not really big right now. They were in Rebirth, but Outsiders, I don't know if it has a continuation of. Yeah.
When you say she loses her memories, is it like regressed or like they're taken from her?
No, that's how you're introduced to the character in the Black Lightning TV show. There are a bunch of attacks that are happening. Mm-hmm. And normally the attacks are not, they're not innocents. These are people who have been attacking other people or whatnot, or haven't, have done something. And so they're trying to find out where the attacks are coming from. And the only way that they find out is that Gamby, I guess you can say Black Lightning's adoptive father figure, basically, catches her leaving the bar one night on video camera. On security footage. She walks into an alleyway, there's a skirmish, and the next thing you know, that leopard walks out. Mm-hmm. So that's how they kind of put the pieces together that they're looking for a shapeshifter. And when they introduce her, she doesn't have her memory. She doesn't know why she's doing this.
Mm-hmm. All right. So we're going to go. These guys get their own page, the Amazons get their own page. The Amazonian women, Island of Women, nothing but women. Now, original, and we're gonna talk about each one of them, but they all have their own backstories. When Dr. Marston created Wonder Woman, he created a strong female character that, in a sense, did not need a man. The women of the island did not need men, only to, quote unquote, procreate. But that story changed over the years, but we'll cover that. We have the first one here is Nubia. Nubia, when she first appeared in, 1973. Yep, there you go, rolling birth year. that story, she is head to head with Wonder Woman. She is equal to Wonder Woman. She is actually Wonder Woman's sister, because the story of Wonder Woman being formed from clay, there was a sister formed from clay who was Nubia. Nubia was stolen by Mars, the god Mars. Yeah, I see your face. The god Mars stole Nubia, the dark-skinned child. It just keeps getting better, but it's 1973. And she was one of the first Black female superheroes of the time. That says a lot. One of the first, like, no, seriously, like between Marvel and DC, she was the first Black superhero woman.
One of the Captain Marvels also Black?
No.
No.
No. So the first, you have Black Lightning. I'm not Black Lightning. Black Lightning, yes, but he wasn't.
Yeah, Luke Cage.
Luke Cage. You had. Who am I thinking of? T'Challa. Black Panther was in 1967 when he was introduced to the Fantastic Four. So she is the first Black female superhero, 1973. She was stolen by Mars. Mars comes along, steals her, trains her to hate the Amazonians, trains her to one day overtake the island of Themyscira, because he knows that she is the sister of Wonder Woman, which means she is her equal. And so she actually comes back best Wonder Woman in a head-to-toe battle. And then she takes off her helmet and reveals she's a Black woman, just so that everybody knows. Then tells them that she was raised on an island opposite of Themyscira. She was raised on an island with nothing but men. And she had the same origin story as Diana. She was created from clay. But on this island, she ruled over men also, because she was their ruler. She appeared later on in context, because 1973 she was there, by 1974 she was gone, because she gave Wonder Woman back her crown. Like, I'm not gonna take it from you this time, but just know I'm better than you, and if I wanted to, I could take this. I just want you to know. That is Monica Rambeau,
Yeah.
who is not Captain Marvel. We'll cover it. She's Spectrum, but she is in the Captain Marvel. Adrian just was asking about the first Black superhero for Marvel, female superhero being Black Captain Marvel, but Monica Rambeau, as we know, is Spectrum. She is in the Captain Marvel comic because Captain Marvel and Monica's mother are best friends. She is raised seeing Captain Marvel every day. So when she grows up, she decides to be a superhero also. So yeah, but back to Nubia. Nubia is identifies as lesbian. She, at one point in time on Earth 1, she appears to be Hippolyta, who is Wonder Woman's mother's lover, which is weird because, you know, that technically, yeah, because her Golden Age appearance, she was her daughter, but they rewrote the character. In 1977, she meets Wonder Woman. 1977, you meet Nubia again. This time she's married to an ex-Nazi who lives amongst the Amazons. Nubia's relationship choices might not be the greatest, but her character has been long overdue for a more prominent role in DC. And just last year, actually this year, they released the Nubia graphic novel, which reimagines her character all over again as a girl growing up in Brooklyn. Like, but she is, well, she's being raised by her mothers in Brooklyn. She realizes one day that, oh snap, I have superpowers. Well, she knows she has superpowers, but she's been downplaying them. And then one day something happens and she's like, Mom, and it's Black Lives Matter, you know. Okay. She's like, Mom, I can't sit back and not embrace who I am as an Amazon. And her mothers are like, well, baby, if you're gonna be that, just be careful because you could still be killed.
Did they not know that?
They know who she is. I know. So we're gonna keep it moving here, because of time. We have Artemis here in the middle. She's the other Bana Megala. She is actually, Artemis goes between Theramascua and her original home. So her original home has actually been destroyed by this time. She is a part of the Outlaws. So she runs around with Red Hood and Bizarro. Bizarro, yes. And she is trying to recover her bow. It's a bow that her particular people have, and they're Egyptian gods. So Bana is that Egyptian god that they worship. She tried to claim it as the bow as her own weapon, the bow of Ra, but that didn't go so well for her, and she was rejected. So her goal is to live back up to that, the disappointment of, she's just trying to get her honor back. So she comes to Earth to fight for that honor and to protect Earth. She and Wonder Woman have a lot of skirmishes because they don't quite get along. Wonder Woman, I've told you a little bit of her backstory. Island full of women, came from clay. That has changed over the years. She has actually come out as bisexual also in Rebirth. All these years, I don't understand why it took so long, but you know. But yeah, she's dated both men and women. One of her lovers was actually in the early comics when Marston was writing it. It was kind of an undertone. So the seduction of innocence wasn't off. It just wasn't necessary also. Gonna move right along here to another character.
Okay. All right. So our next character on the list is Catwoman. Basically, it goes by the name Selena Kyle.
We gotta talk about Phoenix. That show right there.
Selena's
That
personal
movie. I
history
got
and
words.
origin history
Wasn't that good?
is a matter of some debate even for her
Someone needs
closest
to
friends and
mute.
associates. It's understood that she had a rough, isolated childhood and spent largely in and out of foster care or orphanages, where she learned to lie, cheat, and steal through the day to survive. As she grew older, she perfected her skills until she finally began scrapping her alter ego, Catwoman. Her family history had always been a mystery until she began pulling the threads that led her to uncover the truth. She was actually the daughter of one of Gotham's most notorious crime lords, Rex Calabrese. He basically attempted to have her killed by having her shoved off a roof, but she managed to not only survive the fall, but she also followed the trails of clues that led back to her heritage, all while becoming one of the most accomplished thieves in Gotham. Later on, she was able to take her father's seat at the head of the crime table. And she gave up her Catwoman costume and identity to focus her attention on running Gotham's underworld bureaucratic. The Catwoman mantle was temporarily handled by Eiko Hasegawa, the heir of a rival crime family, in the 2015 Catwoman Annual #2. Actually, Catwoman and Eiko shared a romance.
Yeah, they dated during that time. While Eiko was, she was Catwoman, and Selena was not. These two are my favorite. Do you have another question over there?
No.
Okay, so we're gonna kind of breeze through the rest of these. Scandal, Savage, and Knockout. I put them together because you can't have one without the other. Scandal's first appearance was 2005. Scandal Savage was created 2005. Knockout was created in 1994. Knockout identifies as bisexual. Scandal identifies as lesbian. Scandal Savage is the daughter of Vandal Savage, who is immortal. He's an immortal man, been around since the prehistoric period during, magic is what keeps him together. He has a rock or a totem yeah, a meteorite that hit him, and he kept that on like a necklace that he has. But the meteorite gave him powers, and he has been around since then. He's had various children, but Scandal seems to be his favorite, his daughter. She is a villain. She is also a mercenary. She has worked with the Secret Society of Supervillains. She was one of the founding members due to Lex Luthor blackmailing her. And she has been a member of the Suicide Squad, also being blackmailed doing that too. But yes, Knockout is actually a female Fury. So she is from the planet Apocalypse. She's about 7 feet tall. And she is, her alter ego is a stripper that works at a club called the Boom Boom Room. Yes, she was a part of, like I said, she was a female Fury. She escaped Apocalypse, came to Earth, and immediately started fighting Superboy. So she was actually one of Superboy's villains. She came out of the closet when she started dating. Well, she wasn't necessarily in the closet because on her planet, there's no such thing as that form of sexuality and gender like that. Like you sleep with who you want to on Apocalypse. Like she's a new god, basically. She's what's his name? Doomsday. Is it not Doomsday?
No, I mean Darkseid.
Darkseid was her leader on Apocalypse. And yeah, so she is Scandal and Knockout, you can't talk about one without the other. Knockout is killed by Vandal Savage. Scandal takes revenge upon her father and kills her father. You can't really kill him, but he goes to sleep for a long time. And in the process of that, Scandal is basically mourning the loss of Knockout. And when she does that, she meets Knockout lookalike, who is also a stripper. And her name is Leanna. I'm sorry, her name is Leanna. She and Leanna begin a relationship, but in the back of her mind, Scandal is always mourning the loss of Knockout. So she gets a get out of hell card from none other than it's not Constantine she gets it from a demon, Neuron. She gets it from the demon Neuron. She steals it from the demon Neuron. So let's talk about that because she stole from Neuron. There's never a good thing that comes from that. She steals the card from Neuron, gets Knockout out of hell, brings her back, and Knockout, Scandal, and Leanna have a polyamorous relationship from that point on, and they are they're married now, and they have a child that was fathered by Catman. And yeah, they live happily ever after. They are still together. So yeah. Catman, yeah.
All right, our next hero.
You can actually do them together too.
Yeah, is Midnight. Midnighter is a member of the Storm Watch. He was introduced in 1998. His life is shrouded in mystery. His name, family, and childhood life are an enigma even to him. For him, his life began in captivity, where he endured heavy conflict experimentation on his body before he finally escaped. At the age of 14, he's a farmhand named Lucas Trent, who was abducted by aliens while he was returning home from a day's work. The aliens experimented on him and others. One of the other test subjects, Andrew Pulaski, was given powers on the level of Superman, while Lucas had a more subtle power set. Some 10 years after Pulaski was kidnapped, Trent escaped captivity and set out to work as a mercenary. When he left, his body had been altered by implants, providing the often violent hero with superhuman speed, resilience, durability, and strength. But his greatest skill had proven to be his ability to predict a battle before it even happens.
Yeah.
His mind can run through a combat simulation millions of times, literally covering every possible outcome before it even starts, allowing him to counter an adversary's move before it's even executed. He's an on and off again member of Stormwatch and an agent of Guard. He is an openly gay character in DC in a relationship with Apollo. Andrew Pulaski, who was also abducted as a child and experimented on, except the experiments that were done on him gave him powers to rival Superman. Basically a former U.S. soldier and he's the leader of Stormwatch, which is a team that's so secret that no one but the first weatherman, Henry Bendix, knew of its existence, and it was called Stormwatch Zero. Apollo was a normal human, bioengineered by Bendix to have fantastic abilities, including super strength, heat vision, and a high degree of invulnerability. Apollo derives his power from solar energy and becomes vulnerable to attack when that energy is depleted. Of the 7-member team, only Apollo and Midnighter, who was Apollo's future husband, survived. Due to circumstances surrounding the mission, they went rogue and spent the next 5 years fighting undercover for a final world in the alleyways of America and other rivers.
Yes. All right, so the next two we talk about is Poison Ivy and Harley Quinn. If anybody enjoys the Harley Quinn show that's on HBO Max now, the animated one, it's hilarious. These two are in it. But they have a long history. Well, Poison Ivy has a long history in DC. She was created in 1966. The most popular version of her, though, we get is the 1985 version of her after Crisis on Infinite Earth. And she is Jason Woodrow, who is a part of Swamp Thing, was her mentor. And he started experimenting on her with various different things that he was working on. Of course, we know that Poisons and Toxins he was working on. Of course, we know he was trying to create a rival Swamp Thing. He was trying to create that that same experiment that Swamp Thing had to get to become a Swamp Thing.
And let's not forget, Jason Woodrow he's not a superhero, he's not a supervillain. He's kind of caught in between, but he's the flow on man.
Yes.
Okay.
So
he looks like
a nasty version of Swamp Thing.
Like a little small version.
Yeah, he's like skinny, he's not as healthy as Swamp Thing. Yeah. But we understand why. But he poisons her with poisons and he injects her with poisons and toxins. This drives Dr. Isley insane, and she's left hospitalized for 6 months. Woodrow flees, gets away with it. And what he did was he tricked her into thinking that he was actually cared about her to get her to volunteer this. And then basically she finds out he never loved her. It was all a trick. He was actually just trying to get what he wanted out of it, which was to become Swamp Thing. She found out she has the ability to control plants, influence men through her form of pheromones. She can resist all toxins and poisons, and she can kill with a kiss. So she doesn't really have romantic relationships after this, because anybody she kisses will die. Flashpoint happens in 2011. When Flashpoint happens, her character, who has teamed up with Harley in the past, they are with the Gotham Sirens, things like that. They've been, they were villains together. I don't really consider Poison Ivy a villain. She's an eco-terrorist in a sense. Like, all she cares about is the green, like Swamp Thing. Like, if it doesn't pertain to the green, she does not care. So human-wise, she doesn't like humans. She and Swamp Thing identify a lot alike. She uses her seduction to get what she wants also because of her pheromones. Her story is retold in 2011, and she becomes an abused child, a child of, like, she comes from an abused household. Her knowledge of chemistry, she uses her knowledge of chemistry to kill her father, basically. And she's a Wayne Enterprise intern, and she goes a little too far for Bruce Wayne, because she's out here trying to create things that kill people if they go against the green. So he's like, you too, this is too much for us. So you're doing too much, and he fires her, and this begins her career as Poison Ivy. She identifies as bisexual. she and Harley, the only other love interest she actually had, is it Catman?
I said Kite Man.
Oh, nope. Kite Man is in the cartoon. The only other relationship in the comic she has is Swamp Thing, who can take her poisons because he's not affected by them. And Harley,
Right.
because Harley is not affected by poison, because she is walking poison. And she identifies as bisexual. She's currently dating Harley Quinn. Dr. Harlan Quinzel, former psychiatrist at Arkham and Joker's protege and toxic lover. Love made her drop into the same acid as Joker. Harley, she's the queen. She's the queen of crime with the Crown Prince, and she helped him escape. She was his sidekick, his one-sided love affair, because Joker loves only one person, and we all know who that is, and it's Batman and himself. And so when she finds out that Joker is basically been stringing her along in an abusive relationship for years, she leaves him and kind of sort of aligns herself not only with heroes but villains. She works both sides. Harley is not she's kind of, again, she's like Poison Ivy. They really,
If it ain't for my good. If it ain't
yeah, they like, if they need to help the good guys, they will. If they need to help the bad guys, as long as it aligns with what they believe in. That's how these two believe. She's worked with Catwoman. She's worked with Poison Ivy to form Gotham Sirens. She identifies also as bisexual, and she's currently dating Poison Ivy. They've actually gotten married. They got married in Vegas during Flashpoint series. After Flashpoint, which is Rebirth, the marriage was annulled, but they still remained together. Poison Ivy died around that time too. She went back into the green, and she was rebirthed like a plant. It was weird.
Okay.
But Harley found her, and she basically warded her, and
She loves her like I am Groot.
yeah, basically it was like I am Groot.
This is what happens when you go too far in your job.
Our next character on the list is Awful Lad. Real name Calvin Wrong. Human name Jackson Hyde.
No,
No,
he was not.
he was not.
Yes.
He was not gay at first. He is the son of Black Manta and a member of Young Justice. And he is actually the second Awful Lad. The first Awful Lad's name is Garth, and he was killed during the Blackest Night Summit. On TV, Garth was killed in the flashbacks of the Titans.
Mhm.
When he
Now-
watched the Titans, because he was one of the original Teen Titans. Well, they weren't called Teen Titans then, they were just the Titans.
Okay.
Jackson Hyde became his successor when he wrote Brightest Day Story.
Yeah.
So basically, the LGBTQ version of his character doesn't appear until DC Rebirth. So he has been an openly gay character in the Rebirth period of DC from 2016 to 2020.
Yeah.
So basically, his character was totally retconned.
And I think they kind of, if you watch Young Justice on HBO Max, they kind of cover it in that. Like
They finally did.
yeah, he's comes off as bisexual because he had interest in one of the other teammates. I think it was Megan, the Martian,
Right.
but she dates Superboy, and so that doesn't work out between them. And there's another character that comes along, but then he meets an Atlantean, and from that point on, they're together.
Yeah, I read that something later.
All right.
You know,
I'm going to cover Alan Scott and Obsidian at the same time because they're connected. Alan Scott is actually a Golden Age comic, the first Green Lantern. He got his powers from he was a member of the Justice Society of America. His powers come from the lantern that's actually a Chinese lantern. Did not know that.
What?
Yeah, it was a Chinese lantern he got his powers from. He did not get his powers from the Green Lanterns in general. When they rewrote in the 1950s, it was, We should have covered that in our Asian, but he gets it. It was known as a Chinese lantern at the time. That's why he carries that lantern. That it's like a light. Yeah, it's a Chinese lantern. It was mythical. He when they rewrote it and they gave you Kyle Rayner, he was a pilot, and then you had the whole Green Lanterns and the rings.
Right. No.
Kyle?
That's Triumph. No, that's another character.
Okay.
I'll speak about him later.
But yeah, so his character, he was a trailblazer, but for about 80 years, and then when the New 52, Alan gains his powers from the Green. Roland has talked about the Green before, Earth's sentient elemental force that connects all plant life. His character gets his powers from that. He, in the New 52 storyline, is an openly gay man, living as an openly gay man in that storyline. So from that point on, he was an openly gay man. Now, I don't know how that worked out because Obsidian, this guy here, is actually Alan Scott's son. Alan Scott had children with the villain Thorn. He had 2 children, Jade and Todd. They were adopted by abusive parents. Their foster parents are abusive. It comes out that Todd has inherited schizophrenia from his mother, and he has this connection with something called the Shadow Realm. He becomes Obsidian, and the connection with the Shadow Realm gives him his powers and experience of seeing blackness within the souls of others. And it causes him to go insane, basically. So his superpowers cause him to go insane. The schizophrenia does not help. And basically his father, Alan, and another hero, Obsidian, as he goes insane, decides, I need to kill my foster father because he abused me, and then I need to kill my real father because he was never there for me. He goes after both of them, and when he does that, his father, Alan Scott, defeats him. He retreats into the Shadowlands. It's another dimension where he derives his powers. And after he is defeated, he's also cured of his mental imbalance. After being cured, he retires, and during this time, he also realizes that he's gay. After that, he's an openly gay man. He fell in love with Assistant District Attorney Damon Matthews, and he works with a vigilante called Manhunter, who is Kate Spencer. So he's still out here, Obsidian's still out here, but he's sort of, I think he's from the 90s, like his first appearance. Oh, actually, 1983 is his first appearance, but he comes out sometime in the 90s. All right.
So our next character, one of my favorites, we're going to put him in the polyamorous category, whereas anything that moves can get his attention. And we're speaking about
he's pansexual.
we're talking about the Hellblazer John Constantine. First appearance in the Saga of the Swamp Thing, number 37, back in 1985. Now, John Constantine wields the dark arts to save his soul as well as the earth itself. He is the best occult private investigator and also has a bad attitude. His help is always known to come with a price. He is a notorious con man and grifter whose past has a body count. Constantine's moral compass is as gray as it can be. He's an expert sorcerer and magician, but also an accomplished liar and thief, known for his vices, self-loathing, and on-again, off-again death wish. His abilities have afforded him the opportunity not only to cheat death, but to trick the forces that govern heaven and hell, meaning he has no shortage of powerful enemies. John's blood is demonically tainted after a transfusion from the demon Nurgle, which left him with a heightened physical resistance and significantly decelerated aging process. His blood leaves him immune to many illnesses and provides defense against certain types of occult creatures such as vampires. Now, we also know that one of the things that he is afflicted with although he can withstand anything else, he's afflicted with lung cancer.
Yeah.
And that's part of his living hell that,
He
that's part of
literally
his
lives
curse.
with it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like he can't die,
right,
but he lives with lung
but he lives with the pain. Now, like again, he's polyamorous, so
Anything that moves.
many heroes I can't even begin to list and name. Even in the TV shows, they show.
Yeah, and you forget also demons.
Yes, he. Well,
Vampires, monsters,
Anything.
anything that moves.
All right. Jump to the next slide.
Okay,
This next slide.
I'm gonna let Adrian cover this.
Well, hold on. Before we jump in, you're gonna talk about Danny in the Street.
I'm gonna talk about
Okay.
it.
So before we jump into Danny in the Street, which I will go on and say that Danny in the Street is a part of the Doom Patrol.
Mhm.
Okay. There's another character that we left out. That's a real big character, and if you watch Doom Patrol, the TV show, you would have seen him go through this. It's like a real big part of the series, and that's Larry Trainer, the Negative Man.
Yeah.
Yes, the one, he was a pilot, I believe, back in the airplane.
But you know what? He didn't come up on any of my list or research.
And I don't know why, but in the comics, he is.
Okay.
He's a gay man, and what it is that he flew planes back in the 40s and 50s. I believe he was in World War I or something like
Two.
that.
Yeah,
Or two. And that's when he came in contact with the alien entity that possesses him now. The alien entity had been in an accident, and he was about to be in an accident. Actually, I think their planes collide. The spaceship and the plane collided. And in order for the entity to survive, it jumped into Larry Trainer's body, but it's an entity made of nuclear fission material or whatever. So he keeps wrapped up like a mummy to keep the radiation from affecting those around him. Now, what they said in the story, I mean, on the TV show, it's on HBO Max now. One of the main storylines is that he had children, and after his accident, he basically shied away from his family and his wife and his kid, and had not seen them since. Now, what ends up happening is that you find out that although he's married, he is in a relationship with one of his. I think it's a coworker. His squad mates. Yeah, I mean, it's a guy who flies planes with him. Yeah. Who actually dies in this horrific accident. Yeah. And so with that, he never wanted to find love again, but he was not interested in women. But remember, he's from that time period when being homosexual or gay was basically a crime. So he stayed in the closet. When he basically, the time when he came out, it was after he was trying to figure out why he was not getting along with the entity within him. It's like the power that he needed would only come, and it was fleeting. And then when he needed it, it just would not be there. His interactions with Danny the Street let him know that, hey, you got to be at peace with yourself before anybody else can be at peace with you. And so that was the internal struggle of him becoming at peace with himself as a gay man, and at peace with himself as being the, I guess you can say, the vessel for this entity. And once he was able to do that, he went home. Well, he found his son, who is now a 65, 70-year-old man that has his son and grandson and daughter living with him. And through, I want to say, the government shows up and tries to attack them because they know about the entity inside of him. He's trying to tell his son that the reason why he left was because he was gay, you know, and the accident did some things to him. But he never gets it out because basically the military show up, and when they attack him, the entity comes out and attacks everybody around. And one of the military officers fires his weapon towards him, and a stray bullet ends up hitting I guess this would be his grandson. There's 4 generations of them there, because he's there, his son is there, his son's son, and his son's son.
Oh.
You feel me? So the daddy, the youngest child, his daddy, who would be Trainer's grandson, is actually a kid. And so now he can't go back to his family at all. And so he's gotten the part of him holding in, being in the closet, he's got that on his chest. And it's all because of Danny the Street. We're going to talk about Danny the Street because this is a weird character.
So I learned about Danny the Street as I was like looking up rainbow characters, and I could not wrap my head around it's a street. So Danny is a sentient street who is able to place itself anywhere around the world. I guess Danny's pronouns is he. Danny lets people who are tossed out by society have a place to rest. Danny entertains them with drag shows and various shops and cross dresses. I don't know how you would consider a street cross dressing, but it does it by putting pink frilly awnings and curtains around gun stores and really masculine stores. Eventually Danny grew and became Danny the World. Danny the World. But Danny was deconstructed by the gentrifiers.
Oh, God.
The gentrifiers. That's a whole other thing. I can't.
Yeah, we can't go to that.
Only as Danny the Brick. This brick is being protected by Crazy Jane. Danny the Street and Crazy Jane have recently joined Doom Patrol. Apparently, Danny's ability is to geographically just be at any point geographically on the map. And then it grew and it became the world's area. I don't even know.
If you watch Doom Patrol, they kind of throw it out there where the characters just end up in this neighborhood, like a city square, basically, like a strip, basically, an old school downtown strip. Theaters, restaurants, bars, pubs, what they call it, haberdasheries, clothing places, stuff of that nature. Well, while they're walking on the street, they don't know where they are. They're trying to figure out. They come to the end of the street, and it's just barren land. Danny has basically plopped himself in the middle of an open field, in the middle of middle America somewhere. All right. But it's a thriving street. People live there. It's full of inhabitants. When the Doom Patrol arrives and they start trying to figure out where they are, they're looking around and they notice that the marquees on the theater, or anytime they ask a question, the answer comes up on the marquee of the theater or the marquee over the liquor store or the sign in the dress shop. Okay, so that's how Danny was communicating there. And Danny's pronoun is they.
Okay, so
Danny's pronoun is they.
Okay.
Right, but it's a street. So it's neither here nor there, and because it's a place where they see themselves as a place for all of those in life who have been cast aside to come and enjoy yourself. So basically you see a lot of drag queens, you see a lot of clowns, you see a lot of regular normal people, you see a lot of homeless people, but everybody's happy and a party could just jump off at any moment. That's Danny the Street. Have you ever been to what's the name of the street down in New Orleans?
Bourbon Street.
Okay, so there's a spot on Bourbon Street where the lights are kind of dark, and they tell you if you don't live that life, don't go past that part. That's at the very end.
Yeah.
Imagine Bourbon Street just being alive, just like that's Danny the Street. You can see that.
So how did they figure out the street's name? Did they ask the street, what is your name? And it said Danny and the marquee.
You know what?
How did we get you?
The professor probably named it. I don't know.
Yeah.
The professor probably named it because what it is, I'm not sure how Danny came to sentience. I haven't looked that far into Danny. I just thought he was a cool character from watching, because I didn't know. I've read comic books since 1978, and I had never heard of Danny until I watched Doom Patrol. Doom Patrol was not one of the storylines I watched. Hey, let's move off this. We got
actually, we're gonna have to stop at DC and pick up. Yeah, we're gonna have to pick up
with the
Marvel side because we've only covered DC side. So we're gonna have to pick up next time with the Marvel side of LGBTQ, as we are QIA now, actually, as Pride. Yeah, plus as Pride Month continues. So we are going to record their part later, and just be on the lookout for that on the Clayton County Library System YouTube channel. I am going to sort of fast forward a little bit because just want to tell you guys about, oh, you know what? We didn't talk about our boy. Okay, never mind.
Yeah. All right, there's one last one, real quick.
Let me go back.
DC character. Now, I'm not gonna say this.
Yeah.
Well, here he is, Extremo.
Now, I talked about him earlier because he was the first openly gay character in DC Comics, but he was filled with stereotypes.
Now, this character came across one Guardian and a Zamaron channeled their powers into the Millennium Project. This was a gathering of 10 individuals together and teaching them about the nature of the cosmos, and they endowed their chosen with immortality and metahuman powers. Gregorio was one of these 10. As a minor magician, his magical powers were heightened by the procedure, and he became Extremo, which in Spanish means strange. The chosen formed the new Guardians, and it took upon themselves to fight evil where it lurked on Earth. De La Vega was openly gay with a lively, jovial attitude. He referred to himself as auntie and usually imparted parent-like advice to his teammates. Extremo eventually acquired a powerful crystal skull which amplified his abilities. He also helped his team defeat a number of supervillains while trying his best to assist them with personal problems, proving to have an earnest sense of justice and love of life that made him popular with his teammates. On one mission, however, he was attacked by an AIDS vampire called the Hemo God. He was subsequently confirmed to be HIV positive, but it is unclear whether he was infected by a hemoglobin or had already been infected prior to the attack. Okay. And that is DC's Extremo, the very first homosexual comic book hero.
I'm sure you have lots of questions, but so many things.
I don't know. I know nothing about him.
I mean, because he was literally, he was literally like
trendsetter.
Yeah.
And not in a good way.
No, not at all. And we don't know. And it's gonna call for more research, but we don't know if this was a character that they retconned, but if he was just so what's the word?
Flamboyant?
Not even flamboyant, just stereotypical. If he was just he fed into all the wrong stereotypes of that age.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I wonder if they just bury his story.
And one thing I didn't touch on when I was talking about the history, but when I was doing my research, is that a lot of these characters, you got to think up until the 1990s and the 2000s, very, very few times there were women in the room, there were people of color in the room.
Right.
So you have the 80s, the 90s the 90s is when women start getting in the room. You have women writers showing up. The 90s and the 2000s, you get characters like Extremo because there's nothing but men in the room. And they are only going off of what they think a gay character is, or they assume someone who identifies as LBGT.
Which back then it was looked
Yes.
at as being hilarious.
Yes, it was a funny, it was funny, yeah.
It
Now, it was very hurtful to
well,
the
the only reason why it was funny at the time is because none of this was out front. So the normal, average, everyday person, they knew that people were gay, but they didn't know. It was very few and far between that you had people that actually knew a gay person, because everybody wanted to be in the closet.
It seemed like he was not only negative as far as a depiction of homosexuality, it seemed like from his name being Extrano, he was stereotypical in his Latinx type of
yeah. And the other thing too is looking at this time also, the 80s, you had a lot going on, especially in the gay community. AIDS was rampant. The government of the United States was ignoring it. So if you put those two together, you didn't come out the closet, because if you did, I mean, people were just dying at this point in time. And people were trying to get the word out to say, hey, there's something going on. The government is ignoring it, which means the mainstream media is only depicting it in a negative way, as if being gay is negative. And so it's the gay disease. And then by the end of the 80s, that changes because we have more information about AIDS, but also because of some of these groups, like the ones I talked about earlier, GLAAD and Plea Flag, they begin to literally just go into the streets, so that not only are you seen, but now you're acknowledging that we are a community, we are people just like you and everybody else. There's nothing different about us. And it started to change. So by those kids of the 80s who are now writing in the 90s and the 2000s, it could be a man writing, but I think one of Gail Simone is one of the writers who revolutionized writing in the 90s, especially for women characters in comics, but also gay and lesbian characters too. I think she's the one who, Greg Rucka is another one. Some of that early 90s and 2000, late 90s into the 2000s, he's written a lot of, like No Man's Land, he wrote, that was Renee coming out of the closet. He wrote a lot of this stuff because he said, I'm a straight man in a room full of other straight men writing this. He said, but the one thing I did differently was that I started asking, I started talking to people who were different than me and saying, what was your experience when you came out of the closet? How was this? Well, my family didn't accept me, or my family embraced me. So you started getting a multitude of these characters across both Marvel and DC. You have characters who were kicked out of their homes, and then you had characters who were embraced, and it didn't matter. And it's become now, what is it? What are we in 2021? And even though they still face some of the same discriminations and things across the world, but we have them. There's Batwoman is on TV every Sunday night.
The whole CW is
the whole CW represents. Right. But every particular network has a show that has a character that is not a comedic relief. That's not what the 80s and 90s were. They're just people. And I think that's what comics, because they're considered mainstream media now, and you have Marvel being engulfed by Disney now, their Disney product, but they are just now just telling you, hey, it doesn't matter.
Well, one of the things that I think, as far as the representation across the companies, you got to think Marvel basically is the trendsetter of that. Mm-hmm. Just by the fact that they have the X-Men series. Yeah. With the X-Men could stand in as a metaphor for civil rights, gay rights, mutant rights, basically.
Pretty much.
That's what you have there.
So, while we were talking about, Toronto and his circumstances with, being HIV positive, it brought to mind, we had a new character. It's not necessarily Marvel or DC, because there are other,
Yeah.
small, unknown, superhero people now. And his name is Barbarian. And the setting is set in the 70s or 80s, actually. And one of the people he fell in love with, because he is openly gay, he's openly gay, alien from Mars. And she comes down in the 80s, around when there is, around this epidemic that Erica was talking about. And one of the main characters, like his main character died, the love was like is HIV positive and Hispanic. And he seeks help in a hospital run by lesbian nuns. So all the nuns, okay? The doctor is gay. So, it's just, look how far we've come, you guys. Barbados is out here in the streets living his best life.
And if you guys do come by to Forest Park, you can see our, we have our staff picks up. Adrian and Kalia actually do our staff picks. They do our displays. And so right now, the LGBTQIA display is up, and you can come and check out these items. Some of these items.
Some things. This right here is brand safety new and has all of the letters. This is literally the dictionary. It's called the Queen's English, and it is the LGBTQIA plus dictionary. It has all the slang. If you've ever heard anything that you did not know what it was,
that's right.
You can find it here at the bottom.
Okay.
Everything.
And this one right here that you showed earlier, isn't that on
This is Pride. It's also
FX?
on display.
Yeah. Don't they have the FX series that is based off this one too?
Yeah, this is commemorating the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising.
I think FX turned it into a documentary. Yeah. So it's like 6 parts. So
we have the book.
So yeah, guys, come check it out. Come check out our display if you can. If not, we also have Comics Plus here. This is a new database that we have. You can check out comics directly to your device, your phone. I wouldn't recommend your phone, but you could do your like a computer or a tablet. It works really well on a tablet, but all you need is a Clayton County Library card to do this, and you have access to thousands of comics, graphic novels, manga at your fingertips. There's no holes and no waiting lists, and you can download it for offline use. So once you download it, it's on your device until it expires. I think it's a 2-week checkout. So you have 2 weeks to read it, and then it goes off of your device. So it's really convenient. Check it out. We are excited to have it, and it's a great thing. So anything that we talk about or anything that you want to research and you have access to this, I'm sure you can find it on Comics Plus. And on June 29th, we're covering DC's Beast Boy, which is 2 weeks from today, but we will be recording the second half and posting that on YouTube soon. So look out for that. Well, we'll talk to you guys on live again on June 29th, but look out for our recording sometime this week or next week.